the 2008 World Champions of Baseball.
Hockey.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Flyers are going to win the Stanley Cup. The Flyers win the Stanley Cup.
College football.
The Big Ten championship lies on a measurement.
Did he get it? No! He didn't get it! Penn State holds!
They brought back the fun, they brought back the excitement, and now they've brought back a Big Ten championship. The Penn State Nittany Lions are Big Ten champions.
And the NFL.
9 seconds left. Eagles by 8. Brady lines them up. He's back again. He steps up. He's hit. He stumbles. He is throwing it deep for the end zone, and it is batted around and incomplete. And the game is over. The game is over. The Philadelphia Eagles are Super Bowl champions. Eagles fans everywhere, this is for you. Let the celebration begin.
Now, here are your hosts, Joe Mays and Justin Raffa.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 263rd episode of the Joe Mays and J-Raff Show. I am flying solo this evening, so you're stuck with just me, Joe Mays, here because, well, Justin Raffa unavailable this evening, but we must forge ahead to continue our 2018 NFL preview series. We've covered a few of them so far. We're more than halfway here, and actually we're going to do 2 tonight. So if you're sticking with me here live on JMNJR Radio on the Joe Mays and J-Raff Show, or if you're listening in the future via podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or SoundCloud, or even watching the show after the fact on YouTube, we are doing the AFC and NFC North divisions tonight, so 8 more teams covered this evening, and then next week I will be doing the AFC East as well as playoff predictions, and I will have a little input from J-Raff tonight. Justin sent me what he thinks will happen in the AFC and NFC North divisions. So, plugging right along on the 2018 NFL previews. We got to get it done because in a few short weeks, Justin and I will be full go on the Bulldog Hour Season 4. We've already done 2 episodes of the show previewing the off-season, previewing the upcoming season, talking about the off-season, and we will talk about coaches and players and interviews with them on episodes coming up. So with this show focused on pro football, we got to get all of our previews done. So we're going to finish those up this week and next week before we dive headfirst into the Pennsylvania high school football action. So again, for this evening, AFC and NFC North, probably be a little shorter show than usual. I don't do too many by myself, so it'll just be me talking if you can handle that. If not, we do have ways that you can contact the show, and this is always a great time to do so. And let me pull that up for you, and you can take a look at it if you're watching us. We did debut a few weeks ago, troubleshoot a few things here and there, but we are broadcasting live simultaneously on 4 different platforms now. We are doing it on Facebook Live, Periscope, which is through Twitter, our Ustream account, and also on YouTube Live. So there's very many ways you can watch it, broadcast the show live. And if you'd like to interact with us, there's a few ways you can do that. The best way to do so is probably the Mays Sandwich Shop email inbox, which is joemaysandjraff@gmail.com. Again, joemaysandjraff@gmail.com. Make sure you like our page on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter. We'd love to be able to talk with you live during the show or afterwards, get your take on what we said on the show. And you can also call the Mays Sandwich Shop hotline at 530-563-6297. Or if you are watching live, just leave comments in the variety of the threads that we have posted, and I will do my best to answer any questions you have, especially if you're a fan of one of the 8 teams we're covering tonight, or if you want to just talk about what we covered last week, which was a big one, the NFC East. So we had to talk Justin's Eagles, my dad's Cowboys, Saquon Barkley's Giants, and the Redskins. Sorry, I don't have anything to say about Washington. We picked them to finish last. If you think we're wrong about that, let us know. So this evening, we're going to start with the NFC North up first. So the Vikings won that division last year at 13-3. They were one of the best teams in the league the entire season. They fell to the Eagles in the NFC Championship game and actually have a brand new quarterback. So they brought in Kirk Cousins from the Redskins and will look to reign supreme in that division once again this year. It's been them or the Packers every year since 2011. The Bears won the division in 2010. And, well, you have to go back a long time to remember the last time the Detroit Lions won the division. And actually, at the time that the Lions won the division, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were still in the division, which was at the time called the NFC Central. So the Lions haven't won a division title since 1993. So it's been a while for the Detroit Lions, and, spoiler, but I don't think this is going to be their year either. But we're going to start with the Chicago Bears. As you know, if you've been listening or watching our shows, we've been doing them alphabetically by region or city, and the Bears are up first in our NFC North preview. So I'm going to pull up what Justin sent to me about the NFC North, and let's go to his Bears pick. He actually has them in last place, but he says that they're building something good there. They're going to struggle a bit this year. He expects them to finish 6-10. Now that's only a one game better than last year, as the Bears went 5-11 and eventually turned to Mitchell Trubisky, who was the number 2 overall pick in the 2017 draft. A lot of people are pretty high on him entering his second season in the league. I can't say that I'm any different on that. I think actually the Bears will be better this year. I think they're actually going to be better than 6-10. I'm going to say that the Bears are going to go, let's see, they were 5-11 last year. I actually think I'm going to say the Bears get all the way to 8-8. I don't know. I feel something about the Windy City football this year I think is going to be a little bit better. I do think, they were stuck with John Fox for a number of years. He had his best years, way long ago now when it was in Carolina, but he had a few good years in Denver. Wasn't able to get them over the top there. Just kind of middle of the pack with the Bears. But I think Matt Nagy coming in from the Chiefs, and also kind of a local guy here, South Central, Southeastern PA, Manheim Central product. I think that there's a good chance for the Bears to surprise some people this year. They had a tough go last year, but I just think there's an opportunity there for them to improve enough in the division that they're not going to be last place. I also like to throw a wrench into my picks because I've kind of been going status quo a lot the first times we've been doing this, and I just like to change it up a little bit because there's always an ebb and flow with the teams and divisions, and while I don't think the Bears are going to compete for the division title, I think they'll be better, and I think I'm going to place them at 8-8 and third place in the NFC North in 2018. Again, the biggest change was hiring Matt Nagy to coach the team. They're still, I believe, their number 1 pick, Roquan Smith, is still MIA as training camp begins. He's having negotiation issues being a top 10 pick. That sometimes happens. Saquon Barkley just signed with the Giants today. A couple other picks are just getting into camp now. So things are really heating up as teams open up camp or prepare to open up camp. Hopefully the Bears can get Smith in and signed quickly. So last year, Tariq Cohen kind of burst on the scene at the beginning of the year. Although Jordan Howard was the workhorse back, I think that 1-2 punch of Cohen and Howard is a good one to have. Receiver-wise, nothing outstanding for 2 reasons. One, underproduction or just can't live up to the athletic label that he had in college is Kevin White. is he going to be able to do anything finally in what I think this will be, is this his third or fourth year now in the NFL? Yeah, this will be his fourth year. He's played sparingly, hasn't had a huge impact for the Bears. They'll need production from him this year. One of our favorites, though, here on the show, Allen Robinson, the Penn State product. The only reason I'm not high on the Bears receivers is, well, Robinson's coming off a significant injury, tearing his ACL early last season. I believe if it wasn't in training camp or preseason, it was the very beginning of the first game. I can't recall off the top of my head how early it was, but he is now in Chicago and should be the number one receiver there. And they did bring in Taylor Gabriel from the Falcons, who also had a bit of a breakthrough, at least fantasy-wise, over the last few seasons. So, potential in the receiving core, but it could have some issues getting open for Trubisky. Tight ends, Trey Burton, the Eagles, the Philly Special, one of the guys part of the Philly Special. He's signed with Chicago, and he's also there with one of my former Dolphins, Deion Sims. Defensively, I think if Roquan Smith signs and gets into camp, he was one of the guys I wanted the Dolphins to get at 11, but he went to the Bears a few picks earlier, and he should be the anchor inside for the Bears defense. And they do have an interesting secondary that I enjoy to watch. Adrian Amos, one of my favorites from Penn State years ago, he's been playing superb for the Bears over the last few years. They also brought in former first-round Prince Amukamara, and they also have Kyle Fuller, who had an incredible rookie season and has had a tough time matching it. But overall, again, I think I'm not as down on them as Justin is. He says 6-10, one game better. I'll give him. I think that they could get to 8-8, and that all relies obviously on Mitchell Trubisky. If he can have a stellar season, I think this team can get to 500, another offseason, another draft, and I think they can start to climb back into the double-digit wins and push for a division title. So we're going to move on now to the Detroit Lions, who Justin has at 8-8, and he just says they're average. So why not have their record reflect that? So Justin says Detroit 8-8 average, third place in the NFC North for the 2018 season. Let's talk a little bit about what they did last year. Again, the Lions, they were 9-7, which actually was good for second in the NFC North. But I don't know. What Justin says about him is probably about right, but they're just unspectacular to me. They came on strong at the end of the year. Were pushing for the playoffs, but 9-7. Justin has them one step back at 8-8. For some reason, I'm just thinking that this isn't going to be a stellar season for them. And I think with the Bears getting better, I'm just not sure where the Lions are going to slot in. They've got a new coach in Matt Patricia after firing Jim Caldwell. They brought in LeGarrette Blount from the Eagles, from the Super Bowl champion Eagles. I know Justin wants me to say that as often as possible. They brought in Matt Castle as a backup quarterback, but they lost Eric Ebron, they lost Haloti Ngata, and they lost Travis Swanson, their center, replacing him in the draft with Frank Ragnow, the center from Arkansas, in the first round. They did get Kerryon Johnson, the running back from Auburn, in the second round, and Deshaun Hand, I thought, was a great pick in the fourth round, the defensive lineman from Alabama. But I don't know. I've never been a huge Matthew Stafford fan, and while I think he could put up numbers, even with the departure a few years ago of Calvin Johnson, for some reason I just don't see him as a long-term franchise quarterback, despite him being there, how long has he been there? He was picked first overall in 2009, so this is his 10th season already. But what have they done with him there? Not all that much, and I don't know that it's going to get much better this year. Who knows? Amir Abdullah was supposed to be a potential rotational running back guy, and he's that at best now, may not even make the team out of camp. Like I said, they brought in LeGarrette Blount, they drafted Kerryon Johnson, they also have Theo Riddick as Zach Zenner, but they kind of have a bunch of guys there that I don't know. I don't know if they instill fear in anyone. Blunt's the journeyman now, winning a couple Super Bowls with various teams. But there were times last year that the Eagles probably they could have done without him. And maybe the Lions will figure that this year as well. They do have a decent trio at wide receiver: Golden Tate, Marvin Jones, and Kenny Golladay. I think all the three of them are good enough to compete. Tight end wise, we talked about them losing Ebron, and they brought in Luke Wilson from the Seahawks, but not too much there, at least name wise. Defensively, Ezekiel Ansah is the big guy there, and a couple of Alabama guys we mentioned earlier, Deshaun Hand coming in, but they also have Ashawn Robinson, and adding Sylvester Williams and the Penn Stater, one of our favorites from a few years ago, Anthony Zettel. And defensively, otherwise, not a whole lot. Glover Quinn, Quandre Diggs. All right, Darius Slay. Oh, I almost forgot Darius Slay. So they have some pieces, but not a lot of depth, not a lot of things jumping out at me. If Stafford has a bad year with a stable of running backs, I don't know. 9-7 last year, I think they're going to step back a bit. I could see them going 7-9 or even 6-10 and finishing last place in the NFC North. I know getting a new coach in, new style, sometimes can be a boost for clubs, but I don't know. I for some reason, I just don't feel it for the Lions this year. You can tell me I'm completely wrong and crazy. That's fine, but I just think the Lions, to me, are going to be fourth place in the NFC North this coming year. Which brings us to the Packers, who last year were surprisingly 7-9 and third in the North, but of course they had to do without Aaron Rodgers, who was lost to another collarbone injury in Week 6, and they lost 8 of their next 11 games and had their first losing season since 2008. So it was a rough go without their franchise quarterback, one of the best players in the game. And we got to see the likes of Joe Callahan and Brett Hundley primarily taking snaps for the Vikings. And with Rodgers, they were 4-1. That's probably the important thing to talk about. And I think a lot of people are expecting, should Aaron Rodgers stay healthy, which is always a big if he can stay healthy, I expect Green Bay to be back up there at the top. They were 4-1 with him, losing only to the Falcons in Atlanta before losing 3 in a row after Rodgers went down. And like I said, losing 8 out of 11, and 2 of those they won in overtime against the Buccaneers and the Browns. So they struggle without Aaron Rodgers. That just shows how important he is to the Packers and to quarterbacks around the NFL. Rodgers is still one of the best in the game, even as we move close to what you would think soon would be his swan song in the NFL. He's getting up there just like Tom Brady and Eli Manning. So they had some changes in the front office, and we saw that reflected in free agency. They lost Morgan Burnett, but they brought in, I think they re-signed David House. They said goodbye to Jeff Janis, Richard Rodgers, and linebacker Joe Thomas, while bringing in Deshaun Kaiser via trade, where they got rid of Demarius Randall, but also added Muhammad Wilkerson, Jimmy Graham, Tramon Williams, Mercedes Lewis, Byron Bell. It's just a couple of big names there, and Wilkerson from the Jets and Jimmy Graham, who sure isn't the guy that he was with Drew Brees and the Saints years ago, but he never really met expectations in Seattle, but he's still a big name and could be a huge piece for Aaron Rodgers when as long as he stays healthy the whole season. They got rid of Jordy Nelson, and that's probably their biggest loss. Demarius Randall is a tough one there. I think they need to have another option there in the secondary after losing Randall. But they did bring in 2 cornerbacks early in the draft in Jair Alexander from Louisville and Joshua Jackson from Iowa. 2 cornerbacks, 2 secondary guys that should be playing some meaningful time this fall. So, let's take a look at the schedule for the Packers. Oh, they don't have it listed here. That's odd. All right, there we go. Got that one up here. So, they play the Chicago Bears the first week, Vikings the second week, both at home. So, 2 division games the first 2 weeks, and they finish the season with a division game against the Detroit Lions. They get the Patriots this year at Seattle. Oh man, that's a tough mid-season schedule after their bye. So after their bye is at the Rams, at the Patriots, host the Dolphins, at Seattle, at Minnesota. Oh, wow, that is brutal. That might be the toughest stretch that we've talked about on this show. I know there's a few times we went, 3 out of 4 being really tough, but that's 4 out of 5 that are tough, and the 4 that are incredibly tough are all on the road. So if they can get through to, what would that be? The Sunday of Thanksgiving at 8-3, that shouldn't be too bad, because then they host the Cardinals, host the Falcons, go to the Bears, go to the Jets, host the Lions. So, the Falcons we think are going to be pretty strong this year, but don't think the Cardinals will be that great. Bears probably better, Jets probably better, Lions, So those they finish with an easier slate. Their last 5 is not too bad, but those middle 5 right after the bye are tough. That could be the toughest 5-game stretch that we've seen, at least so far, if not completely when all is said and done. But I still think that the Packers with Rodgers are tough to beat. I don't think they're going to go 15-1 or 14-2, but I think this team is definitely good enough to go at least, I think, 11-5. And I'm going to pick them first. I'm going to pick the Packers to win the division at 11-5. Justin had this to say about the Packers. He says they're better than last year, but he still says 9-7. He thinks Rodgers has a big year, but he doesn't think they have a whole lot else. I disagree. But I shouldn't say that. I kind of agree that I don't know how much else that they really have, but I think the most important thing is the quarterback, and Aaron Rodgers is a guy that can win you games. They've always had issues at running back. Is Aaron Jones going to be anything when he returns from suspension? They going to go with Ty Montgomery and Jamal Williams? Will they produce anything? Probably terrible fantasy options, but they still have Devontae Adams and Randall Cobb at receiver. They added Jamon Moore in the draft, so they'll be okay. Geronimo Allison, Michael Clark, Trevor Davis. Someone's going to have to step up from that group to form a nice trio with Devontae Adams and Randall Cobb. But remember, they also added Jimmy Graham and Mercedes Lewis, plus also have Lance Kendricks. So they could be using 2 tight ends with a few of their receivers, Adams and Cobb, and they'll be okay. They still have Bakhtiari and Bulaga along the offensive line, and Jason Spriggs as well. So they have a couple bookend pieces and rotational depth guys that hopefully will keep Aaron Rodgers upright. Defensively, we'll see what happens. With adding Wilkerson could be huge. Him and Daniels could be beastly in the 3-4 ends. And linebacker, a lot of people still love Clay Matthews, Nick Perry, Jake Ryan. They're okay. I think Clay Matthews has seen better days, but at one time he was a terror, and he's still very, very good. We talked about them adding Jair Alexander to the secondary as their first-round pick. They got rid of Randall, but they still have Clinton Dix. They brought back Tramon Williams, Davin House. So I think they'll be okay in the secondary. Probably not great, but good enough that I think they'll go 11-5, and I'll have them winning the 2018 NFC North. Real quickly, had some texts here about what we've discussed so far, if I can find them. And here we go. So my dad says he thinks this NFC North is the weakest division. He thinks the winner of the division is going to be 9-7. Wow. Okay. I don't know about that. I don't think I can get on board with that. So I had the Packers at 11-5, and this next team I'm about to talk about, remember they went 13-3 last year, and while they lost their quarterback to the Broncos, who we have already talked about, they brought in Kirk Cousins, who physically and statistically probably a better quarterback, although, Justin and I kind of talked about it when we did talk about the Broncos, what they were getting in Case Keenum. I couldn't think of his name. What they were getting in Case Keenum, and I don't know. I think it's 50-50 on who I'd rather have, Case Keenum or Kirk Cousins. He also said, where did Nelson go? Jordy Nelson went to the Raiders, which I think we talked about on our first show when we started this way back in May, when we started talking about the 2018 NFL season. Jordy Nelson signed with the Raiders. So, Minnesota Vikings, we already kind of talked about last year, 13-3, first in the North. Had that thrilling win over the Saints in the divisional playoffs before getting blown out by the Eagles, who were on their way to winning the Super Bowl. What's happening this year in 2018? It's their 5th season under Mike Zimmer, but they are actually all of a sudden quickly, they have a little bit of off the field, I don't want to say issue, just kind of they're hurting right now because shockingly this morning it was reported that their offensive line coach, someone that I'm familiar with from his days with the Dolphins, Tony Sparano, passed away. Very young. I think he was 56, and he passed away. So, the whole NFL is sent out their condolences and their thoughts, and me and Justin, same thing, thinking about Coach Sparano and his family and the Vikings organization on this tragic and sudden passing of Tony Sparano. So hopefully they can celebrate him and think about him during the 2018 season. But the Vikings last year had an incredible season with Case Keenum, and they did so with their one of their best players, at least their best offensive player, and Dalvin Cook going down for the season early, and they were still able to get to 13-3. Now he'll be back this year. I don't know if he'll be ready to start the year or not. Those ACL injuries are tough sometimes, but they do have Latavius Murray, who looked very good for them last year, and we already talked about them bringing in Kirk Cousins for Case Keenum at receiver. Stephon Diggs, Adam Thielen, Laquan Treadwell, Kendall Wright, they're okay in that department as well. And at tight end, they still have Kyle Rudolph. So offensively looking pretty good. Along the offensive line as well, Pat Elflein, probably the best center in the game right now. And they brought in Riley Reiff, and they have Mike Remmers. Decent, above average, very good offensive line, and it starts in the middle. The smartest offensive lineman is the center, and they've got one of the best in the games for sure. Defensively, they have some pretty big names along the defensive line. Linval Joseph, Sheldon Richardson, Everson Griffin getting the job done in the trenches. And then at linebacker, Anthony Barr, Eric Kendricks holding it down at that level of the defense. And then you get to the secondary. It's tough for me to pick the Packers over these guys, I got to say, because I do think the Vikings are really, really good. Mackenzie Alexander is the big one with Terrence Newman and Xavier Rhodes. And then Andrew Sendejo and Harrison Smith. Oh, and I didn't even mention Trey Wayne. So, yeah, they've got an electric and crazy talented secondary in Minnesota. And, well, I think I'm gonna put Minnesota. I'm gonna put them at 2 because I said I'm going with the Packers. I'm gonna say Minnesota second, and I think they're only second by tiebreaker. And I think I'm gonna have Minnesota at 11-5 as well. So. I'm going to have Minnesota in second, losing the tiebreaker to the Packers. Both teams at 11-5, because even if I say Case Keenum and Kirk Cousins is a push, this team won 13 games last year. Do I think that they're that much worse this year? No, not really. But winning 13 games in the NFL is really tough to do. So I think they'll small step back, but they are very good, and I'd be shocked if they weren't in the playoffs, honestly. I definitely think Minnesota is going to be a team to reckon with, and they're just going to be a slip-up. Either they're going to lose both to the Packers, or they're going to split but have a worse divisional record or worse conference record, whatever the tiebreaker may be. But I think this Vikings team could very well be as good as the team from a year ago. And Justin had this to say about the Vikings before we move on. Let's see. Justin says 11-5, same as me, similar to last year. But he says because Green Bay is better than last year, I think that could eat into the Vikings a little bit. But yeah, so I think my dad thinks the NFC North is one of the weaker divisions. I think they're getting better. I think the weakest division is probably say AFC South, probably. Jaguars, Texans, Titans, Colts. I think there's a lot of unknowns there with the Texans and Titans. And while I like the Jaguars, I just think they're going to be the division winners there because they're going to beat up on some of the other teams in their division. But we'll see. I'm high on the Vikings and Packers this year. I think the Bears will be better. I think the Lions get a little bit worse. So, all right, let's jump over to the AFC North now as we wrap things up here. Second half of the show. AFC North has been mostly dominated by the Steelers for a number of years. But the Bengals and Ravens are usually right in the discussion, and then there's the Cleveland Browns. But are things going to be different this year? Again, we'll start alphabetically, so we'll go Baltimore, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Pittsburgh. Looking at the AFC North as it sits now, it's been this way since 2002. The only team to not win the division since it became the 4-team AFC North prior to the 2002 season is the Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns have not won the division since 1989, and that was when it was the AFC Central. And a team that has won this division or this iteration of the division going back to when the division started in 1970, when the AFC Central started in 1970. More recent division winners than the Browns, that would be the Houston Oilers, the Jacksonville Jaguars, and the Tennessee Titans. Yes, 3 teams that are not even in the division anymore have won the division more recently than the Cleveland Browns. I'm not going to bang the drum this year for the Browns, at least in terms of winning the division, but I do think they're going to be better. But let's not jump to Cleveland yet because they're the third team we're going to cover. We're going to start with Baltimore, a team that hasn't won the division since 2012 and has only been to the playoffs as a wild card once since 2011. That was back in 2014. So they haven't made the playoffs since 2014. So 3 years without playoffs for the Ravens. Usually, at least since they moved to Baltimore, when the old Cleveland Browns, when they moved to Baltimore, a little unusual. There's not too many years that the Ravens miss the playoffs. When they do, it's just a year. So missing it now 3 years in a row, 15, 16, and 17, out of the normal for them. But the Ravens last year finished second in the AFC North, but were 9-7, shut out of the playoffs, and they were pretty awful. I shouldn't say they were average, below average, entering their bye at 4-5, and losers of 3 out of 4. But they did rebound in the second half, winning 5 of 7, and losing to the Steelers by a point and the Bengals by 4 on the last week of the season. Now, they didn't really beat anyone of note in that second half. They beat the Packers, who were without Aaron Rodgers. They beat the Texans, who were without Deshaun Watson. They beat the Lions, who were average last year. They lost to the Steelers. They beat the Browns, who were the Browns last year. They beat the Colts without Andrew Luck, and then they lost to the Bengals. So, not a lot going on for them. Even though they were winning, they weren't really beating anyone. So it was tough to see them doing anything if they made the playoffs, which they ended up not doing. But they did improve on their previous season when they went 8-8. So they beat up on some Powder Puffs at the end of the year to get to 9-7 and finish second in the division. They've added a offensive weapon in Hayden Hurst in the first round of the draft, the tight end from South Carolina, and then they brought in Lamar Jackson with the last pick in the first round, the electric quarterback from Louisville, and he is the understudy and heir apparent to Joe Flacco whenever he hangs him up. They also added NFL legacy product Orlando Brown Jr., the tackle from Oklahoma, and I think that's probably it. I don't know that I need to talk about any more of the draft picks, but those are the big ones. There are reports that the Ravens offense is running some 2 quarterback sets. I assume Flacco and Jackson are the ones everyone expects to see, but remember they did sign Robert Griffin III as well. At running back, kind of a mishmatch of parts with Buck Allen, Alex Collins, and Kenneth Dixon. Who knows going to get the rock more often. At receiver, they brought in Michael Crabtree. They still have Rashad Perriman, although this could be the end of him in Baltimore, and they added Willie Snead from the Saints. I talked about them adding Hayden Hurst at tight end. They still have Max Williams from the University of Minnesota, came out early a few years ago, but hasn't developed as they would have liked, necessitating the Hayden Hurst selection. So, offensive line, we talked about them adding Orlando Brown Jr., and they still have they brought in Ronnie Stanley, drafted Ronnie Stanley just a few years ago. Marshall Yanda is there as well, but I believe he just was injured. So you can see the necessity of bringing in Orlando Brown Jr. in the 3rd round this year to shore up that offensive line, which usually, historically, has been a very strong position for the Ravens. Also, usually what they do best, well, defense. And they've just kind of been middle of the pack, which upsets a lot of people surrounding Baltimore football. But one of the best is C.J. Mosley, the linebacker, guy I really wanted the Dolphins to get a few years back in the draft. And they have Terrell Suggs, though the end of his career is coming up soon. In the defensive backfield, Eric Weddle was probably the big one. He came over, I think, last year. I think he came over from the Chargers last year and was still a beast at free safety. And he's flanked at corner by Jimmy Smith, who I think is coming back from an injury. And Brandon Carr, veteran, and Tony Jefferson plays next to Eric Weddle. So a veteran group there, but probably on the wrong side of the age that you want to be at this point. So where do the Ravens fall in 2018? Well, taking a look at their schedule, they do have to go to the Chargers near the end of the season. It's a difficult area to travel to, but not great home field advantage for the Chargers, for the Los Angeles teams, really. They got to play Pittsburgh twice because they're in the division. They do have to play the Saints, Atlanta, Kansas City. That's a tough road trip there, back-to-back in early December. I think that's a big saving grace for the Ravens this year, is that they don't have a tough schedule. Especially if they can split with Pittsburgh. That would be huge for them. Justin sees Baltimore going 8-8, but he wants to know, is Flacco going to start all 16? I'm going to say no, actually. I don't think he will. Either by choice or by injury, I could see Lamar Jackson getting an opportunity because he's the future. He has to be. You took him with the first-round pick, and you got to see where he's going to go because this is Joe Flacco's 11th season. And he hasn't been great. Ever since they won the Super Bowl and they signed a huge contract, he has not been great. He has not even been, to me, a top 50% quarterback in the league right now. And my dad chimes in and agrees. Flacco's overrated. I completely agree with that. I've been saying that for a long time. He made me crow the one year that they won the Super Bowl, but other than that, I'm just not a huge Flacco fan. I definitely think he's been massively overrated in his decade plus in the NFL. The schedule sets up, though, that I think they can be good again. They went 9-7, beating teams that they should have beaten while losing to ones that they weren't good enough to beat. So I think they're a middling team. I think, even so, I think I'll go 8-8. I'll say 8-8. And now where do I want to place them, though? Do I want to get really bold, or do I want to... I can't have anyone else winning more than 8. So I'm going to say Baltimore is the second place team at 8-8, and that's exactly where Justin had the Ravens. Neither of us are big Flacco fans, much to Justin's mother's dismay. Neither of us big on the Ravens once again, and I'm going to say for the fourth straight season, no playoffs for Baltimore. Cincinnati, 7-9 last year, third in the AFC North. Started off incredibly slow, losing the first 3 games. Couldn't get much going for them. And they're interesting to us this year because during training camp, a former Wilson football player is trying to make the team. Junior Joseph, he's currently wearing number 48 for the Bengals. He plays linebacker. He had a nice 4+ year career at the University of Connecticut and is hoping to make the squad or the practice squad of the Bengals this summer. So we'll be watching that over the next 4 or 5 weeks leading up to the start of the season. But overall, I don't think Justin and I are very high on the Bengals, and he actually has Cincinnati at, well, he wrote 5-12, which we know is not possible. So I don't know if he meant 5-11 or 4-12, but he does not see good things for Cincinnati this year. I can't say I really disagree with him. Not that they really lost that much. I mean, they lost their backup quarterback to the Bills. They lost Jeremy Hill to the Patriots. They brought in Billy Price, the center from Ohio State, in the first round. That's pretty much it. We talked about Junior Joseph, a guy to watch out. Hopefully he can make the roster for them out of camp. But Andy Dalton, again, he's like Joe Flacco to me. Although Joe Flacco's been held in high regard before, and Andy Dalton never really has. And to me, he's never gotten to a point where he's been a top 10 guy. Flacco can say he was there for 1 or 2 years, but I don't know that Andy Dalton ever was. And, they brought in Matt Barkley as his backup, and they have Jeff Driscoll too, but it's a quarterback league, and I just don't think Andy Dalton is one of the top 10 guys and is going to win you a playoff game. Running back, they have Giovanni Bernard, and their big guy last year was Joe Mixon. Receiver, they still have A.J. Green, and when you have him, anything is possible, but they got nothing from their rookie John Ross last year. Hopefully he can do something for them. Brandon LaFell, Tyler Boyd, interesting mix there, but again, if it's not Green and Dalton's off, it's a tough sell for them. Tyler Eifert, is he going to stay healthy? When he is, he's a beast, especially in the red zone, but he's having a tough time staying healthy, although Tyler Kroft, the backup or the second guy there, is pretty good. And they also have a decent offensive line, too. Bowling, Fisher, Glenn, Agbui. They added Billy Price, so they have a nice starting 5, and they have depth, so that's one thing they have going for them. Maybe they should try to pound the rock a little bit this year and rely on Joe Mixon with a little bit of Giovanni Bernard thrown in there, and then hopefully catching the defense sleeping with Dalton to Green. We'll see what can happen. A lot of decent names on the defense for them. Geno Atkins, Chris Baker, Carlos Dunlap, Michael Johnson, a couple, I believe, or at least one, that Brandon Bell, the Penn State linebacker there, Preston Brown, Vontaze Burfict, and Vincent Ray. 2 of those guys, undrafted guys, so the Bengals definitely like their undrafted linebackers, which could be good for Junior Joseph. And secondary-wise, Darqueze Dennard, Dre Kirkpatrick, William Jackson III, Kaveri Russell. If they could do something on defense. I think the defense is going to have to put it all together if the Bengals want to be close to 500, because I don't think they're close to 500. I agree with Justin. I don't know that I would say 4-12 or even 5-11. I think they're probably more like a 6-10 team. But I'm going to put them. I'm going to say. Oh man, maybe they are. Maybe I have to put them. I want to say 6-10, but that's tough for me because of what I want to do with the next team. So I'll go with Justin or near Justin. I'll say I think the Bengals drop off pretty big this year and go 5-11. I think this is the 16th and final year for Marvin Lewis with the Bengals. That's crazy to me that he's been there 16 years because they really haven't. I mean, they won a couple division titles, but I don't know if they won any playoff games. And he's been there for that long. So, yeah, I think Marvin Lewis is probably done. I think this is his last chance. I think the Bengals are the worst team in the AFC North, and they go 5-11 this season. So, Cleveland Browns. I kind of just mentioned it, and Justin hops on there as well. He thinks the Browns are going to go 7-9. He says they're building, and I definitely think they're building. 7-9 seems a little high for me after only winning. Oh, wait, that's right. They didn't win any games last year. They were 0-16 a year ago. So it's tough for me to think that the Browns are going to win 7 games. But I'm not that far away. I think 6-10 is possible. That's only one off of 7-9, maybe 5-11, and then they win the tiebreaker with the Ravens to be the third place team. I don't know. We'll see. Justin jumped into our chat. He said, "Do you think Flacco will be the starter for Baltimore come up opening day next year?" So in 2019. I don't know much. I should pull up the contract for Flacco, see what that's about, because if he's due for a contract soon, it might be time to get away from that. Sorry to jump back to the Ravens again here. We were just talking about the Browns, or getting to the Browns. Joe Flacco. Okay. Flacco is, oh my goodness. Flacco is signed through 2021 season. He doesn't become an unrestricted free agent until 2022. Ay, ouchie. Oh man, he's got 4 more years. Look, and he's a bargain this year at $12 million, because next year it goes up to $18.5 million. Yeah, I'm gonna say yes based on this. I thought he was coming up on free agency. It doesn't look that way, or it's not that way based on the Spotrac information here. He's not a free agent until the spring of 2022, and he'll be 37 at that time. So he's 33 right now. I think the Ravens keep him on, and I think he's the starter in 18 and 19. And then Spotrac here mentions that a potential out of the contract for him would be, or for the team would be 2020. Because there would only be $8 million in dead cap. But so he's $12 million this year, $18.5 million in 2019, $20.25 million in 2020, and then $24.25 million in 2021. There's no way he's seeing that $45 million in those last 2 years. So they either need to redo that or cut their losses after next year. But to answer Justin's questions, I do think Flacco is a starter this year as well as opening day in 2019. Now, maybe he gets yanked in 2019 for Lamar Jackson, who will be in his second season at that point. I don't know. We'll see. But, yeah, wow, that Flacco contract is looking really, really bad. But anyways, back to the Browns here as we want to wrap up the AFC North. The Browns, 0-16 last year, 4th in the AFC North, got the number 1 pick. After going through quarterback Kevin Hogan, Cody Kessler, and Deshaun Kaiser, who they already traded to the Packers. They're in an entire new direction because of not winning a game. They were undefeated in the preseason last year. I'll give them that, beating the Saints, Giants, Bucks, and Bears. But then they couldn't win a regular season game, losing 2 in overtime. So in 2018... Hugh Jackson is back as head coach. They're looking to end their franchise record and league high 15-year playoff drought and get to the postseason for the first time since 2002. And we already talked about how they have not won the division since 1989, I think it was. So they're working on 3 decades without a division title. So when the Cleveland Browns come of age and get to that point, it will be quite the celebration in Cleveland. I mean, can you imagine if LeBron James and the Cavs hadn't won an NBA title a few years ago, knowing that football is the dominant sport in America and having the Browns be your team. And I'm well aware who my team is, but I've seen them win division titles. I haven't seen them do much else. especially win playoff games, which the Browns might have more playoff wins than the Dolphins do in the same time frame. But anyways, I mean, yeah, it's not great to be a Browns fan, but like Justin says, he thinks they're building to something, and I tend to agree. They brought in Jarvis Landry and Tyrod Taylor. We talked about them trading for Demarius Randall. They had 2 top 4 picks in the draft, and the first one they went with was Baker Mayfield, which was a bit of a shock to people. Not a shock that we didn't know it was happening because it was kind of leaked out that it was going to happen. They made it official with the first pick, and then they came back and got Denzel Ward, the cornerback from Ohio State. Got Nick Chubb with their 4th pick, their second pick in the second round, the running back from Georgia. Another good pick there. So they go with Mayfield and Chubb at quarterback and running back instead of going with something like Saquon Barkley and Josh Allen or any of the other. They weren't going to get Darnold at 4, but Josh Allen or Josh Rosen could have been there. So it'll be interesting to see if Denzel Ward becomes a stellar shutdown cornerback, or people are going to be talking about that miss for a long, long time. So Baker Mayfield, they don't think he's going to start. It'll probably be Tyrod Taylor. That's kind of why they brought him in, probably for the best. But their backfield, the rookie Nick Chubb comes to join Carlos Hyde coming over from the 49ers and Duke Johnson. That's a pretty good trio right there. At receiver, Corey Coleman, Josh Gordon, Jarvis Landry, Jeff Janis. Okay, that's a good quad right there. They got speed, you got overall talent, you got slot possession. That is a very good receiving group. Tight end, Darren Fells and David Njoku. All right, yeah. Offensive line. Now they lost their biggest and best offensive lineman to retirement, but that happens sometimes. But it's a shame. It's a shame that he didn't stick around because, man, they're building something there. Joe Bitonio, Spencer Drango, Greg Robinson hasn't lived up to draft status, but still, J.C. Treader and Kevin Zeitler. That's a pretty good, especially interior rotation there that they've got going. If they can solidify their tackle spots, they probably they'll be okay. Defensively, Myles Garrett was a freak when healthy and ready to go last year, and opposite him, or I should say, along the defensive line, they have Carl Nassib, the Penn Stater, who had a ton of sacks years ago and has been kind of just swirling around there in Cleveland, waiting for something to happen. But if they can get Myles Garrett free and get a lot of one-on-one matchups, he's going to turn into something special for them for sure. Jamie Collins, Michael Kendrick, Christian Kirksey, a pretty decent trio of linebackers. Again, they got Jamie Collins from the Pats a couple years ago in a trade. Michael Kendricks was just released by the Eagles and lands there, shoring up the linebacker position for the Browns. And in the secondary, well, we already talked about them bringing over Demarius Randall in a trade. Great get. They have Jabril Peppers now in his second season, and they added Denzel Ward, who they obviously think is going to be quite the impact player in the NFL. Now, a team that wins 0 games, winning 5, 6, 7, seems like a bit of a stretch, but I think they can do it. I like their offensive pieces. I think their line is solid. Defensively, I think there's enough there. I think there's enough there to climb out of the basement and win 4, 5, even 6 games in 2018. So I'll say that they tie the Bengals at 5-11, but I'll give the Cleveland Browns the tiebreaker and say they finish in third. But a 5-win improvement is great, and if Baker Mayfield comes along and learns the system, learns from Tyrod Taylor, and watches films on Russell Wilson and Drew Brees, and stays out of trouble off the field, and not is the reincarnation of Johnny Manziel, the Browns should be moving in the right direction for sure. And, well, that wraps us up here with the Steelers, the odds-on favorite to win the division. They went 13-3 last year, lost that shootout with the Jaguars in the divisional playoffs, but I don't think there's really any reason to think that this isn't the Steelers' division to lose. And, you know, my dad kind of talked about thinking the North was the worst, and maybe he was talking about the AFC North. And if he was talking about the AFC North, I completely agree with him there. I think the AFC North is probably the worst division in football because other than the Steelers, I just don't see how there's any way anyone but the Steelers is going to win this division. 13-3 last year. Justin has them going 10-6. And I think with that division, I think they should easily go 10-6. I'll say 11-5. But there's really no reason that they shouldn't win at least 10 games. At least 10 games. You know, they have a nice quarterback roster now with Roethlisberger nearing the end. They drafted Mason Rudolph. They've been going to Landry Jones as the reserve. They also have Joshua Dobbs. Now, this could be the last year of running back Le'Veon Bell in Pittsburgh. He never signed a long-term deal. But we'll see if he reports on time or if he gets back in time for the regular season. They'll have to go with James Conner and Stephen Ridley and Fitzgerald Toussaint if Bell isn't ready to go. Wide receiver, well, we know Antonio Brown's the best in the game. And they also have Hayward Bay, Justin Hunter, and Juju Smith-Schuster, who burst onto the scene last year. And that's quite the receiver core going for Roethlisberger. And then Jesse James, the outlaw, is paired with Vance McDonald, tight end. Solid group there. Offensive line is settling in with Ramon Foster, Marcus Gilbert, David DeCastro, Marquise Pouncey, and Alejandro Villanueva. Again, another very solid, above average, and strong group of linemen there. Defensively, they have McCullers, one of my favorites at nose tackle with Javon Hargrave. Ends, they brought Alualu from the Jaguars a few years ago to go with Stephon Tuitt and Cameron Hayward. A great defensive line there in Pittsburgh. It shouldn't surprise anyone. Linebackers haven't fit the bill, been the best over the years, like we were used to them being at least, about 10, 15 years ago. But TJ Watt had a great rookie season, and he looks to get even better this year. And we'll see if they can get anything out of Bud Dupree. I just wonder what they're going to do inside with Ryan Shazier not ready to play, and he may not ever be able to play again. We'll see what happens with him. Hopefully he can continue his stellar recovery and get back on the field if he so chooses. DB, again, another issue for them over the years, but they did bring in Morgan Burnett from the Packers, and they have Joe Hayden, the Browns cast off one time, thought it was one of the best corners in the league. Not too much else to say. Average, I'd say, average. So that's probably their biggest weakness, I'd say, probably in the secondary for them. But again, being in that division, they should be okay. They got a tough game with the Chiefs early in the season and the Falcons as well, but both of those are at Heinz Field. Then in the second half of the season after their bye, they have Carolina at Heinz Field. They do get the revenge game at Jacksonville. And they get to host the Patriots. So their biggest away game all year is probably Jaguars. Now, they play at the Ravens 2 weeks before that, and that's a rivalry game, so you can't count that out. But their toughest games, Chiefs, Falcons, Panthers, Patriots, all at home. So, again, that just reinforces me that the Steelers are the best team in the AFC North, and there's no reason that they shouldn't win the AFC North, probably by at least 3 games. At least 3 games. They went 13-3 last year. I think they go at least 10-6, 11-5 easily. Things would really have to fall apart for them not to do that. So, yeah, thanks for joining me here this evening to talk about the NFL. Try to wrap up our NFL previews here with the AFC and NFC North divisions. Next week, I'll talk AFC East and move on to the full playoff alignment and our Super Bowl predictions, and I'll make sure to talk to Justin about what he expects. And then we'll be done for a while. We're going to focus on high school football and the Bulldog Hour in August. So I think that's pretty much it. So thanks for joining us. This wraps up the 263rd episode of the Joe Mays and J-Raff Show. Be sure to tune in every Sunday at 8:30 on JMNJR Radio. Hey, hit us up on the social links, visit the website, like us on Facebook. You know the deal. But pretty much, thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week. Have a great one, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the Joe Mays and J-Raff Show. Tune in every Sunday for the latest sports discussions from Joe and Justin. Each episode is available live
On Facebook Live.
and can be downloaded or streamed on iTunes and SoundCloud. You can interact with Joe and Justin on Facebook and Twitter, and stay up to date with the guys at joemaysandjraff.com. The Joe Mays and J-Raff Show is part of the JMNJR Radio Network. For more info, visit jmnjrradio.com.